is a contracting method that is used a lot in Europe, and we use it in Florida. And I'm going to let Aaron explain it. It's still fairly new for us as well. This hasn't been going on for what, maybe, I don't even know if it's been 10 years with this.
As far as concessionaire contracts or PPP, public-private partnerships, these have been used in Florida for very large projects in general. We've got projects that are very large in scope and scale, typically longer in duration. Just to name a few examples, we've used them for the reconstruction of the Interstate 595 corridor in Broward County here, west of Fort Lauderdale. We used them for the construction of the Miami Access Tunnel, an underwater tunnel that connects Interstate 395 with the Port of Miami. And currently ongoing right now, we're reconstructing a very large portion of the Interstate 4 corridor, heavily trafficked in the Orlando area. And that's about a little over 20 miles of that roadway. And on the turnpike system, we've actually used concessionaire contracts to modernize and upgrade all of our service plazas on the system. There's 8 service plazas total on the turnpike system here in Florida. I think some of the defining aspects with this contracting mechanism is they're large, they're long duration, typically involve an initial reconstruction period that can be very significant. And us, mainly we use like a 5-year term to design and construct improvement for a corridor. And then the remainder of the duration of the contract is typically the O&M period, the operations and maintenance period, which is very similar to our asset maintenance contracts that we just talked about. The performance provisions that are involved with how the concessionaire is supposed to operate and maintain that facility. And then toward the end of that operations and maintenance period, often there are handback requirements. So the condition of assets have to be in a certain state of affairs before they're turned back over to the department. Specific to bridge structures, we use the general condition bridge rate, MBI condition ratings. So we'll say we have criteria that says all bridges must be at least a minimum MBI condition rating of 6 or better on that scale of 0 to 9. Obviously, if it's not, if you have any bridges that fall below that, the concessionaire is going to have to rehabilitate those structures and to bring them back up to condition before they're turned back over to the department. Let's just say that, okay, just to touch upon the procurement process a little bit. As I mentioned, these are typically very large projects that involve significant reconstruction and development work. So there's professional services aspects. So the concessionaires will have to submit a technical proposal similar to the professional services contracts. They'll be graded by a technical review committee, and then they have to bid price as well. So just like the other contracts, there's 2 parts, and I believe we are using the same weighting factor, but don't quote me on this. So probably the 70-30 split is what we're currently using. And so the concessionaires have to be competitive in both aspects to make sure that they're successful in pursuing the project. The other defining aspect really is that there's availability of private financing often for that reconstruction period. So concessionaires will often pair up with private equity partners to bring that financing for the reconstruction period. Obviously, longer term to pay back that financing to the financiers. As far as many of our concessionaire projects also include tolling components, which is another source of revenue that can be used to pay for the cost of the project. Florida, we've implemented managed lanes in many of our large interstate corridors, express lanes, variable toll rates that are based on, it's a congestion management tool. As far as advantages, I guess I would say that main one with concessionaire projects is you've got the ability to reconstruct a large scale reconstruction of a corridor all at once, rather than having to go through multiple phases or projects to accomplish the work throughout the corridor. You've got access to those financing options. As far as disadvantages, I guess I would say that probably the main one is that, and certainly just a lot of consideration up front, when you develop that scope for that concessionaire project, make sure it meets your needs or perceived needs throughout the term of the contract. It's a very long contract. Because once your work is underway, it can become very difficult to make changes, or they can become very expensive for you if you got to renegotiate. So with that, that's all I was going to touch upon with concessionaire type contracts.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to why we do this to begin with. Florida is a growth state, every year another 300,000 people move into Florida. So a little over every 3 years, we got 1 million people moving in. And as a growth state, our transportation system needs to expand. What this really does is Florida puts up some seed money, the concessionaire arranges for the rest of the money, and then they do the work, which is typically widening, except in the Miami tunnel we built from, from scratch, basically, or it was built by Bew and run by them for France. But it's a way of us actually expanding our system and paying for it through user costs, because there's no other way to keep up with the added demand. So that's why Florida is got into this. And we, like Aaron says, it's done for big corridors that are very expensive. The whole key is we manage it the same way we manage any other contracts. It's very much like an asset-based contract once it gets built. And I know that basic Virginia has a version of this type of contract, right, Jeff?
Yes, we do. Virginia started using these type of contracts in 1995 through a piece of legislation that was called the Private or Public Transportation Act that provided the legal authority for Virginia to use P3 contracts. The provisions are very similar to what was described in Florida. It's a long-term type contract. Typically, if the contract involves building like a large bridge or a corridor that includes bridges, it will include provisions that the bridges have to be returned to Virginia in a certain condition, whether it's based on general condition rating or condition states, whatever the case may be. There will be some provision that the contractor has to have maintained the work to a certain level before returning it to ownership by the state. What we do is very similar to what Florida's doing.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.